If he treated you worse, the more you loved him. Stop blaming yourself. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern. And it's one of the most psychologically damaging relationship dynamics a woman can experience because it makes love itself feel like the mistake. You watched him chase the woman who barely cared, while punishing you for showing up fully. You gave consistency and were met with cruelty. Loyalty was answered with distance. Devotion was treated like a weakness. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, you started asking the most dangerous question of all. What is wrong with me? Here's the truth that changes everything. You weren't treated worse because you weren't enough. You were treated worse because your love exposed something in him he couldn't face. And once you understand the psychology behind that, you'll never see your love as the problem again. I keep having the same conversation with women who've given everything to relationships that left them broken. And every single one is asking the same devastating question that haunts their sleepless nights. Why did he treat me worse the more I loved him? Why did the woman before me, the one who barely cared, get his devotion while I got his cruelty? And these aren't bitter women complaining about all men. These are successful women, intelligent women, women who know their worth and understand what healthy relationships should look like. Women who've experienced something so psychologically damaging that it shattered their understanding of love itself. They gave their hearts completely and watched as their kindness was met with coldness, their loyalty rewarded with betrayal, their devotion answered with indifference. And when they ask me why this happened, when they desperately seek answers for the cruelest paradox in modern dating, I tell them something that initially makes them angry but eventually sets them free. You weren't treated worse because you were worthless. You were treated worse because your love was too valuable, and he knew it. Your pain is real. Your confusion is valid. And what happened to you has a name, a psychological explanation that proves you weren't imagining things, weren't being too sensitive, weren't asking for too much. The pattern you experienced is so common, so predictable, that researchers have studied it extensively. And once you understand why this happens, once you see the psychological machinery behind his behavior, you'll never blame yourself again. You remember when you met him, right? How different everything felt in the beginning. He pursued you with an intensity that took your breath away. He called when he said he would, planned thoughtful dates, and made you feel like the most important person in his world. You felt chosen, special, like you'd finally found someone who could match your capacity for love. The future felt bright and certain. You started planning, started hoping, started believing that this was it, that this was your person. You opened your heart completely because everything about his actions suggested he was doing the same. So you gave him everything. Not just your time and attention, but your emotional energy, your trust, your vulnerability. You showed up consistently, supported his dreams, managed his stress, celebrated his victories. You became the safe harbor he could return to after difficult days, the person who believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. You loved him the way you'd always wanted to be loved, with complete acceptance and unwavering support, but something changed. Slowly at first, then dramatically. The calls became less frequent. The plans became last minute or canceled altogether. The attention you'd grown accustomed to started flowing elsewhere. He became distant, critical, sometimes cruel. When you asked what was wrong, he made you feel like you were being needy, clingy, too demanding. Your attempts to reconnect were met with frustration. Your expressions of hurt were dismissed as overreactions. Meanwhile, you heard stories about his ex, the one who came before you, the one who barely returned his calls, who was always too busy, who treated him like an option rather than a priority. And somehow, inexplicably, he still talked about her with a reverence that made your stomach turn. She was the one who got away, the challenge he never conquered, the woman who occupied space in his mind that should have belonged to you. You started questioning everything. What did she have that you didn't? What was wrong with your love that made it so easy to dismiss? Why did your devotion seem to repel him while her indifference drew him in? You analyzed every interaction, every text, every moment, trying to identify where you went wrong. You convinced yourself that if you could just love him better, more perfectly, more completely, he would see your value and return to the man you fell in love with. But the harder you tried, the worse he treated you. Your increased effort was met with increased withdrawal. Your expressions of love were answered with annoyance. The very qualities that should have made you irreplaceable seemed to make you disposable. And this is where the psychological torture truly began, where your mind started breaking under the weight of trying to understand something that defied all logic. Here's what was actually happening in his mind, the mechanism that was destroying your relationship without him even realizing it. When you showed him consistent love, reliable affection, and stable commitment, his brain interpreted this as safety. And safety, while essential for healthy relationships, doesn't trigger the same addictive neurochemical responses that uncertainty does. Your predictable love became background noise, while the chaos of his past relationship remained a powerful drug his system craved. The woman before you had unknowingly created what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. She gave him attention randomly, unpredictably, in small doses that left him constantly hungry for more. His brain became addicted to the neurochemical highs that came with finally receiving her affection after periods of withdrawal. The uncertainty kept his dopamine system activated, creating an addiction-like attachment that felt more intense than actual love. When you entered his life offering consistent love, his conditioned brain couldn't recognize it as valuable because it lacked the artificial scarcity he'd learned to associate with desire. Your steady presence couldn't compete with the emotional roller coaster he'd experienced before. Your reliability felt boring compared to the dramatic highs and lows of his previous attachment. Without realizing it, he began recreating those conditions with you, withdrawing affection to recreate the uncertainty that felt familiar. This is why your increased efforts only made things worse. Every time you responded to his withdrawal with more affection, more care, more attempts to prove your worth, you reinforced his unconscious belief that withholding love creates stronger attachment. You became trapped in a psychological experiment where your natural, healthy responses were being used against you. The cruel irony is that your love was exactly what he needed, but his damaged attachment system couldn't recognize its value. Years of conditioning had taught him to chase what ran away and dismiss what stayed close. Your consistency triggered his fear of vulnerability, while her unavailability felt safe because it protected him from the risk of real intimacy. He punished you for offering what he claimed to want while rewarding her for withholding what he desperately needed. You weren't competing with another woman. You were competing with a trauma response, an addiction pattern, a psychological wound that had convinced him that love should hurt. Your healthy love couldn't win against his unhealthy conditioning because you were playing by entirely different rules. He was playing the game of scarcity while you were offering abundance, and his damaged system couldn't process the difference. Understanding this doesn't minimize your pain or excuse his behavior. What happened to you was cruel and devastating, but it wasn't personal, even though it felt like the most personal rejection imaginable. His inability to value your love says nothing about your worth and everything about his psychological damage. You weren't too much, too clingy, or too available. You were too healthy for his unhealthy patterns, too secure for his insecure attachment style, too whole for his broken system to recognize. The woman who came before you wasn't better than you. She was simply more compatible with his dysfunction. Her emotional unavailability matched his trauma patterns, while your emotional availability challenged them. He chose familiar pain over unfamiliar healing, known chaos over unknown peace. And in doing so, he lost something precious while convincing you that you were the problem. This pattern is so common that it has destroyed countless relationships between good women and damaged men. Women who deserved celebration received criticism. Women who offered healing were given hurt. Women who brought peace were answered with chaos. And each time, these women walked away convinced that their love wasn't enough, that they needed to be different, colder, more withholding to be valued. The truth is even more disturbing than you realize. While you were questioning your worth, analyzing his every mood, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering his withdrawal, he was unconsciously running experiments on your emotional system, testing how much you would tolerate before you finally left, pushing boundaries to see if your love had limits, creating problems to watch you solve them, withholding affection to observe your desperation, manufacturing crises to witness your loyalty. You became his personal laboratory for studying female attachment. Every time you stayed despite his poor treatment, you confirmed his hypothesis that good women will endure anything for love. Every time you forgave his cruelty, you taught him that kindness has no backbone. Every time you explained away his behavior, you enabled him to treat you worse while maintaining the illusion that he was somehow the victim. This is what no one tells you about loving someone with damaged attachment patterns. You don't just give them your heart. You give them a manual for how to break it. Your reactions to his withdrawal became a roadmap for future manipulation. Your willingness to fight for the relationship became permission for him to stop fighting. Your emotional investment became his insurance policy that he could behave badly without consequence. Meanwhile, his ex remained powerful in his mind precisely because she never gave him this roadmap. She never showed him how much she would tolerate because she wouldn't tolerate anything. She never demonstrated her breaking point because she left before reaching it. She maintained her mystery, her unpredictability, her power, while you surrendered yours in the name of love and vulnerability. You thought you were building intimacy, but you were actually dismantling your own authority. Every boundary you compromised to keep him happy weakened your position. Every standard you lowered to accommodate his issues diminished your value in his eyes. Every piece of yourself you sacrificed taught him you were expendable. The most heartbreaking part is how your nervous system adapted to this treatment. You started walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring his moods, anticipating his needs, managing his emotions before they even surfaced. You developed hypervigilance that exhausted your body. Your nervous system lived in chronic stress, always preparing for the next rejection, the next criticism, the next withdrawal. You learned to celebrate crumbs. A text message became a victory. A kind word felt like a gift. Basic respect seemed like extraordinary generosity. Your standards dropped so gradually that you didn't notice how far you'd fallen. You became grateful for treatment that would have horrified you in the beginning. You measured his love not by what he gave you, but by what he didn't take away. Your friends watched in horror as you defended behavior that was clearly destructive. They tried to show you what they could see, but you couldn't hear them because your survival depended on believing his treatment was justified. To admit it was cruelty meant admitting you'd been accepting cruelty, an unbearable truth while you were still trapped in it. You developed what trauma specialists call cognitive dissonance. Your mind created elaborate explanations for his behavior rather than accepting the simple truth that he was choosing to hurt you. He's stressed. He's not good at expressing emotions. He has trust issues. He's scared of losing me. You became his unpaid therapist while ignoring your own deteriorating mental health. The gaslighting was subtle but devastating. When you pointed out his inconsistency, he said you were keeping score. When you expressed hurt, he said you were too sensitive. When you asked for consideration, he called you needy. Slowly and systematically, he convinced you that your normal emotional needs were flaws. You started doubting your own perceptions. Maybe you were overreacting. Maybe you were expecting too much. Maybe love was supposed to hurt like this. Your self-trust evaporated while your trust in his distorted reality solidified. The isolation that followed wasn't random. It was a psychological strategy, even if he wasn't conscious of it. Your friends became negative. Your family became judgmental. Anyone who could help you see clearly became a threat to his control. You found yourself defending him to people who cared, making excuses for his absence or rudeness. You protected him while he criticized you. You fought for him while he blamed you. You preserved his image while he destroyed your confidence. The psychological damage was cumulative and insidious. Each day of poor treatment built on the last, creating a foundation of self-doubt that infected every part of your life. Your work performance suffered because you couldn't concentrate through the emotional chaos. Your friendships weakened because you had no energy left after managing his moods. Your health deteriorated from the chronic stress of trying to love someone who punished you for doing so. You stopped recognizing yourself in the mirror. The confident, radiant woman who entered the relationship was replaced by someone anxious, diminished, constantly seeking approval. You measured your worth by his treatment instead of your own accomplishments. Your happiness became entirely dependent on his moods, his attention, his validation. You forgot you were whole before him and convinced yourself you couldn't survive without him. The trauma bonding became complete the moment you started feeling grateful for the bare minimum. A simple good morning text made you emotional. A brief, affectionate gesture felt monumental. Basic decency felt like deep love. You were no longer staying because the relationship was good. You were staying because leaving felt impossible. The sunk cost fallacy trapped you, telling you that walking away meant wasting everything you'd invested. So you doubled down, you worked harder, loved harder, gave more. Meanwhile, he grew more comfortable giving less. This is where the story darkens even further, where the psychological manipulation evolves into something you didn't realize was happening at all. Because while you were busy trying to save the relationship, he was becoming more skilled at exploiting your attachment. Every reaction you had to his withdrawal taught him something. Every time you cried, he learned the exact level of coldness needed to break you. Every time you forgave him, he learned emotional consequences did not apply to him. Every time you tried harder, he learned he could try less. He learned that disappearing for days made you desperate, not angry. He learned that criticism made you apologize instead of defend yourself. He learned that withholding affection increased your effort. He learned that you feared abandonment more than you feared mistreatment. You were never just his girlfriend. You had become his blueprint for emotional control. He wasn't consciously evil. Most men with damaged attachment aren't intentionally malicious. But damaged people instinctively learn manipulation as survival. Your love became his testing ground. Your reactions became his manual. Meanwhile, you are developing something far more dangerous, learned helplessness. Every time you tried to address a problem, he dismissed you. Every time you expressed a need, he twisted it into a flaw. Every time you stood up for yourself, he turned it into a fight you ended up apologizing for. So you stopped speaking up, stopped asking for anything, stopped hoping for change. You learned that silence was safer than honesty, that numbness was safer than vulnerability, that shrinking yourself was safer than being seen. And he rewarded your silence. Whenever you stopped complaining, he'd suddenly show affection again. Whenever you stopped expressing needs, he'd throw you crumbs of attention. Enough to keep you alive, never enough to make you whole. Those rare moments of affection, those breadcrumbs, kept your hope alive, kept your dopamine system hooked, kept your heart chained to a reality where the pain was constant and the relief was rare. Your nervous system was being rewired to crave chaos. Calm felt unfamiliar. Stability felt suspicious. Peace felt like the calm before another emotional storm. You weren't experiencing love. You were experiencing addiction disguised as love. And the cruelest irony? During this entire emotional demolition, you were becoming the best partner you had ever been. You became more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, more supportive. You were growing emotionally in ways that would make you an extraordinary partner to someone healthy while being destroyed by someone who wasn't. You were improving while he was staying the same, and somehow this disparity made you believe you were the problem. Now here is the truth, the one that finally sets women free when they're ready to hear it. His treatment of you was never about your worth. It was about his wounds. You weren't broken. He was. Your love wasn't the problem. His inability to receive it was. The woman who came before you wasn't better. She was simply more compatible with his dysfunction. Your emotional availability threatened his trauma. Her emotional distance protected it. He chose familiar pain over unfamiliar healing. He chose chaos because chaos made sense to him. He chose her emotional unavailability because it matched his attachment wounds. He rejected your abundance because he didn't know how to function in it. You were too whole for his broken system to recognize. Too emotionally healthy for his trauma patterns to process. Too real for the fantasies he built around avoidance and scarcity. Stop apologizing for being everything he needed but couldn't value. Stop blaming yourself for wounds you didn't create. Stop questioning your worth because he couldn't see it. Your love was never the issue. His capacity to receive love was. Now you know the truth. His treatment of you was never a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of his wounds. You weren't broken. He was. Your love wasn't the problem. His inability to receive it was. The woman who came before you wasn't superior. She was simply more compatible with his dysfunction. You were too healthy for his unhealthy patterns, too secure for his insecure attachment, too emotionally available for someone whose trauma convinced him that love must be chased, not received. He chose familiar pain over unfamiliar healing. He chose chaos because it felt safer than peace. He chose emotional distance because real intimacy terrified him. You were the upgrade his system wasn't built to handle. And now that you finally understand what happened to you, the way forward becomes clear. Because here is the real liberating truth. He didn't devalue you. He devalued the version of love he was incapable of understanding. Your devotion wasn't a weakness. Your consistency wasn't the problem. Your emotional availability wasn't too much. You were offering healthy love to someone psychologically conditioned to crave unhealthy attachment. He couldn't recognize your value because recognizing it would have required him to confront his own brokenness. And he wasn't ready for that level of accountability. Your role in his life was not to fix him, shrink yourself, or learn to love him incorrectly. Your role was simply to love him honestly, and you did. But what you must understand now is this. Your love wasn't wasted, it was misplaced. You poured your heart into a vessel with holes in the bottom. No matter how much you gave, it could never stay full. Not because you weren't enough, but because he wasn't capable of holding it. That is not your failure. That is not your flaw. That is not your burden to carry. You tried to save a drowning man, not realizing he was pulling you under with him. Not out of malice, but out of unconscious survival patterns he never learned to heal. And now, your healing begins with a single, powerful realization. There was never anything wrong with your love. It was simply too healthy for a man who wasn't. You weren't too clingy. You weren't too emotional. You weren't too affectionate. You weren't too much. You were exactly who you were supposed to be, just in the wrong relationship. Everything you gave was right. You just gave it to someone who wasn't capable of recognizing it. Your softness wasn't the problem. His inability to feel safe with softness was. Your consistency wasn't the problem. His addiction to chaos was. Your vulnerability wasn't the problem. His fear of intimacy was. Your devotion wasn't the problem. His damaged attachment system was. He didn't leave because you were unworthy. He left because your love demanded a version of him he wasn't ready or willing to become. You didn't lose him. He lost you. He lost the one woman who would have loved him into becoming the best version of himself. He lost the peace he didn't know how to hold. He lost the stability he wasn't ready to receive. He lost the love that would have healed him if he had been willing to face his wounds. And now you must reclaim the truth he made you forget. You are not hard to love. He was hard to heal. You are not too much. He was too limited. You are not unworthy. He was unprepared. And the woman before you? She wasn't better. She was simply easier, for the wrong reasons. She fit his wounded patterns. You challenged them. She fed his addiction to inconsistency. You offered him peace. She maintained the chaos he associated with love. You offered the healthy stability he wasn't ready for. So he ran. Not from you, but from the version of himself he would have had to confront in order to love you correctly. Let that truth be the moment you stop blaming yourself. Let it be the moment you stop questioning your worth. Let it be the moment you stop rewriting your personality to match someone else's wounds. Because the woman you were in that relationship, the one who loved deeply, loyally, fully, she is your superpower, not your flaw. The right man will not be overwhelmed by your love. He will be healed by it. He will not run from your vulnerability. He will meet it. He will not punish your consistency. He will reciprocate it. He will not compare you to his past. He will see you as his future. And he will thank every version of you that survived long enough to reach him. Until then, remember this. Your love was never the problem. His capacity was. And that is not your burden to fix.